Hello guys, today we'll be covering a 2022 psychological thriller film called Don't Worry Darling. The movie begins at Dean and Bunny's house during a party, as everyone is seen enjoying their time. The wives play a game in which they must balance a tray containing a liquor glass on their heads, and Bunny ends up winning it. Another couple, Alice and Jack, sneak out in a happy mood and take a drive while making out in the car. The next morning, Alice prepares Jack's lunch and gets his things ready for work while playfully tempting him to stay in. They live in Victorytown, a 1950s-style experimental community where the wives say goodbye to their husbands as they leave for work, all at the same time. The husbands work for Victory Project at Victory Headquarters, which is located in the middle of the desert. They're believed to be employed in the technology sector, and the wives are forbidden from asking about their husbands' jobs. Alice goes to a ballet class instructed by Shelley, who's the wife of Victory Project's founder, Frank. They welcome a new member, Violet, whose husband has started working at headquarters alongside the other men. Shelley pays close attention to Alice throughout the dance and helps her with her posture. Next, Alice notices her neighbor, Margaret, clenching a toy airplane while standing with her eyes closed. Despite finding it strange, she doesn't give it much thought and goes to the kitchen. There, Alice notices something strange with the eggs. When she cracks them open, she's shocked to see no yolk in any of them. Later that evening, when Jack gets home, they're both filled with passion and make love at the dinner table. The following day, Frank organizes a party to officially welcome their newest members, Bill and Violet. Everyone is there, and as usual, both men and women appear to be in utter admiration of what Frank is accomplishing with Victorytown. However, Margaret speaks up and insists that the woman shouldn't be there, and her husband, Ted, quickly pulls her away before she can start a scene. Seeing this, other women discuss how Margaret has been disturbed since her son disappeared into the desert. However, Margaret claims that the company took her son as punishment for uncovering whatever mystery she found. Later, Alice goes inside the house, and Jack begins to make out with her. Meanwhile, Frank enters the room and creepily watches them, but only Alice notices him. The next day, the women meet in a showroom and talk about the event from the previous day. As Peg was not present there, she asks about Margaret's outburst, and Bunny replies that Margaret has threatened her husband's position in the company. Alice feels sorry for Margaret and assumes she must have seen something, but Bunny reminds them that there's only one rule they must abide by, that the wives should never travel to the Victory headquarters. In the meantime, Alice experiences hallucinations in which she sees some women doing a dance routine. Next, Alice rides a trolley out of town and into the desert. As she looks up at the sky, she notices a plane falling and crashing into the side of the mountain. She requests the lorry driver to take her to the accident site, but the man freezes up and says that he's not permitted to go there. Frustrated with this, she gets out and tries to follow the trail by herself, and eventually she reaches the headquarters. When she touches the glass entrance of the headquarters, Alice sees visuals of blood and women dancing in synchronization. And with that, she also hears the sound of Frank's voice somewhere in the mix. Suddenly, she wakes up back in her bedroom, where Jack claims she's been sleeping for hours, but Alice has no memory of returning home. From that point onwards, Alice's behavior and visions worsen, as she imagines the house trying to squish her between its walls and windows. After that, she gets a call from Margaret asking her about the plane she saw, but Alice denies seeing anything and asks Margaret not to call her again. During ballet class, Alice has a vision of Margaret smashing her head in the mirror. She panics and runs back to her house, where she finds Margaret standing on the roof and slitting her own throat. She tries to reach Margaret, but she's dragged away by a group of men dressed in red, and before she can revolt, she passes out again, waking up in her house with Jack. When she questions Jack about the terrible incident, he dismisses her claims by telling her that Margaret is at the hospital being treated for an accidental fall. Nevertheless, Alice is certain that her friend committed suicide and asks Jack about his actual work at the Victory headquarters. Jack doesn't disclose anything and warns her that her irrational beliefs are endangering their lives. The next morning, Jack leaves for work, and Alice starts to wrap some meals to divert herself. She suddenly begins to wrap plastic wrap around her head and keeps it there until she's on the verge of suffocating. Later, when the town doctor, Dr. Collins, comes to check on her, he completely dismisses her claims that she saw Margaret slit her throat. He simply says that it might be one of many delusions that she's had. Collins gives her some pills, but Alice declines, saying she doesn't need them. When she's speaking with the doctor, Alice notices a file with Margaret's name on it. When Collins forgets his suitcase, she quickly steals the file before he returns back to get it. Later, Alice opens the file and discovers that most of the recorded information has been redacted and blacked out, so she ends up burning the file. Next, Alice and Jack attend a big event that Frank is hosting, where all the other couples are also present. The ceremony starts with an impressive dance performance by a stripper, which causes Alice to hallucinate about her bizarre dancing visions again. She begs Jack to take her back home, but he ignores her as he's completely involved in Frank's announcement. Then Frank announces that Jack has been promoted and will now be working with the seniors. While he awards Jack with a ring for his achievements, Alice loses her composure and rushes to the restroom. While Jack performs on stage, Bunny approaches Alice in the restroom and asks her if she's all right. Alice tells her that something shady is going on in the town and their husband's workplace. However, instead of being a true friend, Bunny tells her to stop assuming things and accuses her of going crazy like Margaret. The following day, Alice and Jack host a party to celebrate the promotion and invite all the neighbors. The other couples are surprised that Alice was able to persuade Frank and his wife to come over to their house. A while later, Frank approaches Alice in private and confirms to her that everything she suspected is true. He also expresses his challenge and admiration for her curious nature and leaves. During the dinner, Alice decides to expose him and brings up several things that she's noticed. She talks about how most of the women are from the same region and that all of the women have the same story about how they met their husbands. Alice accuses Frank of being behind something evil and claims that they're being brainwashed on purpose to forget their past experiences. However, Frank doesn't cave under the pressure and maintains his composure, which makes her even angrier. The dinner comes to an end when Shelley finally tells Alice to be quiet and tells her to stop humiliating her husband. The rest of the people have some doubts as well, but they all dismiss Alice's allegations as hysterical outbursts and leave. Afterward, Jack feels let down because he believes Alice planned the dinner on purpose to ruin his job. On the other hand, Alice is adamant that everything she said is true. She also asks him to leave Victory Town right away as something is seriously wrong with it. Jack eventually agrees to go with her plan, but One Direction is not one of them. As they're about to leave, Jack apologizes to her while he watches the men in red jumpsuits take her away. He hears Alice screaming and pleading for help, but he just sits in his car crying in guilt. Meanwhile, Dr. Collins places Alice on a surgical table and forces her to undergo electroshock therapy. Then she sees a flashback of her other life where she's working as a surgical doctor in a hospital. Alice is seen living with her husband Jack in a shabby apartment. After working long hours and being extremely exhausted, Jack wants to get intimate with her, but Alice rejects his advances. As she goes to bed, Jack listens to Frank's motivational speeches and is inspired to join the Victory Project. This project is a virtual simulation where the husbands trap their wives to fulfill their needs and desires. In the simulation, Jack decides to have a British identity, and Alice's entire memory is erased before she enters as a Victory citizen. After receiving treatment, Jack takes back Alice to her home, where she's greeted by everyone with a large party. She has no recollection of the earlier events, and her days continue as usual. However, one day as she's making dinner, Alice hears Jack humming a song that they used to know in the real world, and she suddenly remembers how he forced her into a simulation. After coming to this realization, she confronts Jack, accusing him of taking away her life choices to satisfy his male ego. In his response, Jack says that he genuinely wanted to see her happy as she used to work long hours and was very unhappy in the real world. He further reveals that all the husbands, including him, leave Victory every day to go to the real world and work there to pay for the procedure. As he begs for her forgiveness and grips her tightly, Alice slams a liquor glass over his head, ultimately killing him. As soon as Frank finds out about Jack's death, he sends agents to capture Alice. In the meantime, Bunny shows up and asks Alice to leave Victory immediately. She also reveals that all this time, she was aware of the simulation. But Bunny and her husband chose to live there so she could be with her children who'd passed away in the real world. Furthermore, she explains that killing the men in the simulation also means killing them in real life, and that the only way she'll be able to survive is to run away. As Alice steps outside wearing a blood-stained dress, the community begins to go out of control. With this chaos, the other wives also realize the truth about their lives in Victory. Next, Alice drives away in Jack's car, while the men in red suits and Dr. Collins chase her. During the chase, Alice suddenly hits the brakes, which makes Dr. Collins collide with the men in red, causing them all to die. At this moment, Frank's wife, Shelley, who's been listening to all the updates, decides to make a significant decision. Just as Frank is about to leave and deal with Alice on his own, she takes a kitchen knife and stabs it into his heart. In the meantime, when Alice tries to drive up the mountain, her car becomes stuck and obstructs the path. and behind, the men in red start to climb the mountain to catch her. When she finally reaches the headquarters mirror, Alice sees a vision in which Jack asks her to remain in victory and to be with him. However, now that she's free from restraint and has grown a conscience of her own, she decides to take a leap and touches the glasses. The screen then goes black, and the movie ends with Alice gasping as she wakes up in the real world.